Progress. Okay, okay. So everybody else will show up when they show up. Alexander, are you comfortable with the way I'm approaching this? Hello, Alexander. Oh, okay. All right, so we're going to begin today with aphorism 47. And I found this really interesting because I recalled aphorism 3, and I want to read the present kind of what I came to the conclusion here is that passion is valuable and should not be suppressed. And if it is suppressed, it can't be completely erased. And when it comes back, it's going to come back with even more energy. And when he uses the word savage at the end, and let me just quote that part. Wait a minute. Eventually, passion itself will be reached this way, and our descendants will not only indulge in savage and unruly forms, but will be really savage, which I find very scary. So anyway, I went back and I realized that aphorism 3, and I'm going to read the part here. The unreason or counter-reason of passion is what the common type despises in the noble, especially when this passion is directed toward objects whose value seems quite fantastic and arbitrary. Suppression can't completely destroy passion. And when it comes back, it doesn't say in 3 that it's savage, but this is another one of those things where he's amplifying a previous aphorism. And so I found this pretty interesting. And I think he's probably right about the passions. The passions and the instincts and the drives are so deep that they control us in ways that we don't even understand. So that's where I'm at with this. Where are you at? Once again, I presume that you all, oh, Barbara.
Yeah. Well, I think what struck me about this is that he's saying that suppressing the language of passion actually will change the way you feel and respond. He says if one wants to suppress not the passions themselves, but only their language and gesture, one still attains, in addition, what one did not desire, the suppression of the passion themselves. And then he gives an example of the Louis the whatever it is.
The 14th.
Okay. And then he says it's the same in our age, that people won't use the outer forms of passion, maybe because they think it's too coarse or too peasant-like or too not noble, not cool enough. Nevertheless, eventually passion itself will be reached this way. So that's the interesting part, is that he's saying if you change the conventions and the norms, you actually alter the way you feel. But eventually what happens? I'm not sure how passion itself gets reached. It's not clear.
Yeah, I sort of had the feeling here that there was like a cultural drive to deny that the passions were even there at all. And so culturally, and that's why I think he gives the example of Louis XIV, there's almost a pretense of passion instead of an actual expression of passion. And if this goes on long enough, the passions themselves almost lack a means of expression. But I think what he's trying to say here is that he doesn't think that this can go on, that eventually the passions will reassert themselves. there's a certain, and I'm presuming there's a certain inevitability to that. I'm going to suppose that you all agree completely with me on that. Well, okay. What a rare moment. Jason.
I think last week we discussed this one. I think, and then I don't think you agree with me last week. So that's why let me give you another try. I think this one, at least I I will focus on the fickleness, okay, of everything human. So I think he's talking about stable and unstable, but I'm not sure which way Nietzsche prefer. I don't know, but I just do see the fickleness of everything human. Okay, so that's our nature is keep changing. And the next sentence talk about the merits of morality sustained the faith that all of man's inner life was attached to the iron necessity with eternal clips. So what is internal is keep changing, and the white outside is try to fix it. I think that's what Nietzsche is describing, but I'm not sure which way he like. So later on, he talked about people grow who at times grew tired of the rules and of eternity. So people feel tired of this, and to the end, he talked about on the boat, right? You climb ashore and stand with both feet on the firm old ground. Yeah.
You're doing 46 and we're doing 47. Yeah, I
Oh, I'm
realize.
sorry. So no wonder I think that's a little bit change. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's,
All
okay.
right.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. So let me. No wonder I thought that you disagree with me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, once we're done with them, we're done with them. Barbara.
Well, there might be something interesting in the last one, because it talks about how how freeing I think it is to be wrong once in a while, or to just abandon yourself to something imaginative. But this seems to be talking about, number 47 seems to be talking about another kind of suppression that leads to unfreedom, and that's that good manners take over where maybe authentic expression should um, should be used. Because he says that Louis XIV was an age marked by an incapacity for bad manners. So that even if someone insulted you, you just got you just verbally silenced them with obliging words. That's what he says. And he's saying it's still like that. So good manners is something that he seems to be complaining about too.
Yeah, I think I think that could be said about this pretty straightforwardly. What I'm supposing here is that I'm going to have to let that thought go. Brad.
Yeah, just a historical note. It says here that the age that followed Louis XIV was brought up in the suppression of expression, which would be Louis XV and the early part of Louis XVI before he lost his head. And there's a good French movie, Ridicule, which it characterizes what he's talking about here, where the court has refined to a high degree the bantering of ridicule with each other. So that where it says that an incapacity for bad manners, even an insult was accepted and returned. Matter of fact, an insult was valued as a sign of sophistication. If you could tear down other people, that was a sign of sophistication. I don't know what it quite, I don't quite understand. I'll have to think about the last, or I guess the penultimate sentence, where what's demanded, I guess what's demanded in Nietzsche's time is a convention of the passionate, but not passion itself. So it's a show of passion, I guess, but not true passion. Is that how you interpret that?
Yeah, that's what I would do with that. Yeah, yeah. That it's artifice rather than the actual expression of feeling. Because he says right before that, I delight in all the coarser eruptions and gestures of passion. And so apparently that, even though that would look like bad manners, there's a certain what I'm supposing based on some of the stuff we've read along the way, that there's Nietzsche has a certain appreciation or wish, and I'm not sure how far this goes, for the passions to assert themselves. Real passions, not just pretend and not covering it all up. I'm not quite sure what that would mean, how that would look in real life. But I think what you said is right on, Jason.
Yeah, right now I'm in the right aphorism. So I think here is I think the message is quite clear, so that's nothing to disagree. I don't look like, you know, I agree with what Fred talked about, convention of passion, and then but I'm not. I think lack of the passion themselves had in their praise, graceful, shallow, and playful manner. So I think he is ridicule the social norm. Okay, after Louis XIV, I'm not very sure about the history, but basically talk about when human society become more polite and more cultured, and we seems to lose the passion, and people is no more passionate, okay, everything. So we lost the genuine passion. I think that's he's talking about. And this situation is, I have to guess, you know, Nietzsche doesn't like this. And continue on what Nietzsche you talking about, the finding yourself, and then I think the self to Nietzsche is just be yourself, and it's driven by passion. And then he probably doesn't like the situation he saw because the culture, because the outside world start to control, and he even talked about something pretty, or the insult was accepted and returned with appraising word. So that's the situation, and I think he may call it. I think he doesn't like it. That's I see, you know.
Yeah, the politeness. Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, I think part of what he's getting at here, and I think it's worth remembering that he knows he's speaking to a relatively small group of people. My brothers, that's what he said earlier in an earlier aphorism in a reference to his readers. I think that he would rather see somebody live their emotions more openly than most of us do. That I think that there would be, for Nietzsche, a virtue in realizing who you are in as fully as possible, even though it may be dangerous or risky, because there seems to be a certain fondness for that kind of person. Audrey.
Well, I'm sorry I'm late. I just couldn't sign in. I still can't. I don't understand what happened. But and it's Meetup, not you guys. It has nothing to do with Zoom.
Yeah, when,
So anyway, but I agree. I mean, you probably already talked about it. So I heard, I came in on Fred talking about the movie Ridicule, which I saw years ago, a couple of times, which was a fabulous movie, the way they did it. Um, and I think that's exactly what he's talking about here, that suppression of actual emotion, and using your intelligence to show who you really are instead of your passions to show, so there's some way of, yeah, it's a suppression. It's an actual suppression. So it's a planned, like what's allowed, it's all related to custom and the culture at the time, and it has nothing to do with the actual individual urges and yeah, so I think that's what he prefers, because then a true person who does things through their passion, at least can be addressed, because you know what you're actually, your enemy. There's something noble about having, the confrontation of, even trying to persuade, but it's coming from the heart. So it's interesting to me. It can get really dangerous. I could see why people think Nietzsche was dangerous, and I could see how people used his words, but it's actually quite beautiful when you think about it. So
yeah, I like the way you've kind of interpreted that. Because I think there are enough aphorisms down the road. I don't know why I know this, but that will develop. He's not really in favor of people suddenly exploding in murderous impulses. I think part of it is you sell yourself short if you deny your passions and cover them up and act as if they aren't there or even try to suppress them. You get this one trip through and you ought to feel everything that you are. Barbara.
Well, he seems to also be criticizing not just the kind of good manners where you can slay somebody with a well-placed insult, but he's also talking about in life and on the stage and in everything written. I see the delight in all the coarser outbursts and gestures of passion. And so he might be talking about plays and things where it's Sturm und Drang, it's real melodramatic, and people get a vicarious thrill out of watching these really extremely emotional plays. But it's sort of what would you say, a stand-in or a substitute for really feeling the passion. But then he ends this by saying that eventually we will. And so I guess that's sort of like flipping on its head the idea that if you suppress the words of passion, the passion goes away. But in this case, you're using the outer shell, the words of passion. People don't lose that sort of facility with it. And maybe eventually those words will produce passion. So he's sort of like suppress the language and you suppress the feeling. Don't suppress the language and maybe the feeling will return.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Fred.
I wonder what people have to think about how that relates to today, because when I listen to popular music, when I can stand it on the radio, one of the things that puts me off about it is that it is so dramatic and confessional. It's all about themselves, and I just find that so tedious. And if anything, I think the artistic expression of popular music and books and most everything is, but when I'm an old fart, so I don't count, but I think it's just way too over passionate. TV, all of it is just wallowing in sort of this this maudlin attitude, and it's just all about themselves. And I just wish, that it was a little bit more directed towards uh, get out of yourself. And if you're going to write a book about, start with a historical novel. Matter of fact, write about somebody in some time that you have absolutely no relationship to, so that you can express another's point of view. Get out of yourself, what I'd say. But like I say, I'm old fart, so I don't count. But it seems like we have way too much at least superficial passion in that sense today.
Yeah, one of the something that's just occurred to me about the very last part of passion, nevertheless, eventually passion itself will be reached this way by act to show of passionateness, and our descendants will not know, blah blah blah, the rest of it. I'm sort of thinking of, and this is an extreme and an ugly example and all the rest of it. But there's a certain amount of delight, I think, for a lot of viewers in watching like a heist movie. And at some level, you actually want the bad guys to get away with it. And actually, what I was thinking of earlier, not so much that, is when somebody kills somebody. I remember there's a scene in, as long as we're talking a little bit about movies, Lawrence of Arabia, where Peter O'Toole as Lawrence admits it's a really high point of the film that he really liked killing this guy. It was the first person he'd ever killed. And I think that we experienced a vicarious thrill when we see this sort of stuff on the movies. I shouldn't say we, I. There are times when it's the, yeah, get that sucker, Audrey.
Yeah, well, interesting. Well, first of all, I'm a closeted punk person myself, so I really like punk music and I love the words. And I think that it does have a lot to, they create a whole bunch of, I mean, a lot of people can't stand the music, but I just love it and I always have. And, and I, if it's done well, and it's always talking about the relationship with them in the world, usually, and or the culture, or some kind of institution. So it's social in that regard. I don't agree with Fred about an artist not being personal. I mean, I like that. I mean, that's what art is. And even if you write something about somebody in history, it's still going to have some of you in there, no matter what you say, because even the person that you choose is already something that that's you're affected by in some way. So so it's always, I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with the wallowing and all of that kind of stuff, and I don't like romantic music necessarily, unless it's classical music, because then I can put my own words to it. But if I need words, most of the time you don't, with certain kinds of music, certainly. So I guess in this regard, I mean, I'm not speaking for Nietzsche for sure, because, and I don't know, I saw that film too, Lindsay, and that part gave me the creeps, like Peter O'Toole can so easily do, and he says something that's like so true, and even he had a hard time getting the words out in the film, if you remember. And
Yeah.
because it's an emotional thing when somebody all of a sudden enjoys something that they think would freak them out. So I don't know, but at least he knows where he's at, and now he has, so he can make his own choices about it. And so he knows it's going to affect him. And so therefore he's got to be really careful, and he's not going to hide his passions, but he's going to learn about how to, skillful means to still allow for the passion, but maybe not kill. So I don't know. I think there's lots of ways to work with your mind here and your environment and accept that you're part of it and you're definitely engaged in all different ways, and you just need to, pay attention to your world. It's very interesting when it comes to this kind of really savage at the end, when he uses the word really savage. I don't, is he warning us, or is he, is this sort of like trying to excite us? I don't know.
I think it's a warning. I don't think he is saying that's going to be a good thing. I think he's sort of suggesting that because of this screwing around with the passions, generally suppressing them and then acting them out,
Right.
that when the emotions do surface, and they will, they're going to come out in a really bad way. And the thought I was trying to develop, I didn't quite finish that whole thing. I think that example I gave about vicariously enjoying somebody killing somebody else awakens that passion in me. And I think that might be a bit of the dynamic that he's getting at here at the end of this aphorism, that this display of passionateness that I react to loosens up that part of me that I've been suppressing,
Right.
that doesn't kill my neighbor
That
or
makes
something.
sense.
Yeah. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I absolutely agree with your comment about, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. The way I interpret it, like latent murderousness in people, I think, like in popular entertainment, violence is practically the high fructose corn syrup of like movies and TV. Like if you just think about how many times you've seen on TV or in a depiction somebody be murdered or killed, and how little censorship there is, and how many times, like in a movie or TV, you've seen people actually having sex. Like it's more acceptable to see a bullet enter a body than a penis and vagina joint, or a penis and an anus or whatever. That's never going to be, that's at least not anytime soon. That's not on TV. Get an X rating in a movie theater, but somebody being killed, oh, no problem. People get killed, murder slash one. But how many times have you actually participated in an activity like that versus how many times have you participated in a sexual activity? So the level of like appealing to that suppressed violent urge, I think, is tremendous in society. So that's one comment I want to make. Another comment I want to make is I kind of disagree about the overall orientation of Nietzsche. Nietzsche, in my opinion, and I'm going to try, I have trouble here because I can't remember exactly what he wrote before this and what he wrote after this, but I do know that he wrote stuff before this, and I like to remind people of this, venerating slave society and venerating,
That's,
go ahead.
I don't think we've been there. I don't think he's venerating. I think you might be mistaken about that. Genealogy of morals can be taken.
I'm not talking about genealogy morals. I'm talking about like, okay, I'll just stop there because I can't quote the passages for sure. I'll look into it.
Yeah.
But go ahead. That's fine. I'll stop there.
Okay, I think I know where you're going, and don't stop. I think there was an aphorism earlier. I just disagreeing with the idea of venerating. I don't think he did that. I think he was observing and describing a different kind of cultural phenomenon than actually enslaving people. But go ahead and go ahead and do
just in this work, just in this work itself, if we just go back up a few passages, let me see which one it was, where we were talking about, I was pointing out that he was talking about how those who were born to rule the masters, I think he used the term slaves, I'm not sure exactly what term he used, would, if they behaved like masters, then the God, let me find the actual text. If they behaved in the right way, then the slaves would willingly follow them or submit to them. Do you remember the passage I'm talking about? It was just like you. Let me see.
I do believe that came earlier. I just took it a little differently than took it a lot differently actually.
Oh yeah. On the lack of noble style was the one where he italicized higher race, he italicized the word slavery, he italicized the word born. And yeah, and almost everybody interpreted that differently than I did. But I don't think he's just being metaphorical there. I think he's on the lack of noble style. He's actually talking about, like, there's people who are meant to be, well, okay, that is straying a little bit in the future. But he is, like, where was that?
Well, go ahead and look it up and then come back. Barbara.
For the masses are basically prepared to submit to any kind of slavery, emphasize slavery, provided that the superiors constantly legitimize themselves as higher, as born, italicized born, to command. So to me, he's appealing to the masters, not to the slaves. But he thinks the position of the slave is to obey. That's the right orientation of society. At least I think that's implied in this statement. So when he's talking about the sadism and the hostility, I don't get that. Like, people are kind of like overlaying this kind of utilitarian humanism on top of him and interpreting, because he does have very profound and radical insights, I think, into psychology. And in fact, this passage that we're talking about here, I think, is really gets at his profundity and his insightfulness, because he's not just talking about what's going on in society, he's talking about what's going on inside people. And he's showing, like, the conflict inside people and how that is parallel. Well, he's not actually showing that part in this emphasis, but he's going deeper into the psyche rather than just talking about society, but he's connecting the two, the psyche and society, which I think is, like, genius. It's absolute genius. But I think that the way people are overlaying their own morality, their own kind of utilitarian humanist values on top of him, I don't think that's who he is. I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Barbara, your hand was up earlier, right? And then somehow it disappeared. Yeah, like Zoom, evil Zoom. Yeah, go ahead.
Zoom made my raised hand. Yeah, I don't know how that happened. Well, yeah, I think this is an interesting discussion. If you think about what he's sort of saying, he's saying that people, part of what he's saying in this aphorism is that people go out and consume entertainment that makes them feel a certain way without actually having to own every ramification of that feeling, right? And that's what you were talking about when you were watching Lawrence of Arabia. You didn't, presuming, go out and kill somebody. You just got a certain feeling from hearing him say that. But it kind of makes me wonder. Lately, I've been trying to avoid really, really negative things to read. Because I don't want those images in my head. I want only, like, positive images now. But it seems like you can't avoid it. And the more classical or canonical a work is, the more likely it is to be really dark. And I'm thinking of one that I struggled with and gave up, which was Faulkner's Light in August. And I thought to myself, why do we have to read about these draggy ass negative people and long too? We can't even keep it short. And I wonder, does it mean, does a work have to have that kind of element in it to be considered good or serious? It just seems right now in my particular situation, I want to eliminate all that, and I'm finding it really difficult to do.
Yeah. I think the virtue of some of those books, and it's like my example from Faulkner would be the Absalom, is that it it reveals a deeper truth. And I think this is a lot of what Nietzsche is about, is there are these things buried down inside of us that we are not necessarily in control of, but they're there anyway. They're atavistic phenomena that are part of what it is to be human in the world. The aphorism coming up sort of addresses this. And so I think that's why there's a value to those books, because it puts it in your face. Absalom is all about Southern bigotry and racism. And it exposed it at a time right in the heart of Jim Crow. And so I think that there's a virtue to that personally, I think. I'm not sure what Nietzsche would think of it one way or the other. Fred?
Yeah, I'd like to criticize my previous comment in a way based on what was stated by others so perceptively.
Are you going to take back the old fart part?
I'm unfortunately I can't take that part back. That's just so obvious. But and then this relates to what Nietzsche was saying as well, in that what I said before was kind of superficial, because what I was thinking about was confessional romantic poetry or writing or so forth. Take, for example, Taylor Swift, the icon of popular music, who I think is actually a great singer and a very good songwriter. But good Lord, her era's albums and the like, her themes is just gets so tedious, one after the other. Oh, I'm so in love. I'm so in love. Oh, no, we're breaking up. Oh, I'm so in love. Oh, we're breaking up. Oh, I'm so in love. I mean, give me a break. And yet she's the icon for modern entertainment. I'm all for passion. I love opera, Puccini. I'm all for violence in movies. That's great. I get a thrill out of that. What I don't like is that obsessive concern with themselves in passion as romance. But that's, I think, in looking at this passage, passion in terms of romantic passion, and in particular, that kind of saccharine or romantic passion that we wallow in these days, is not what Nietzsche's talking about. Passion is more like a commitment. And by the way, I really like punk music too, Audrey. But that's a different story, and that's far from punk music. It's far from sort of maudlin romantic story. But I think this is a broader notion of passion that he's talking about here, and not what I was referring to. Thanks.
Yeah. To come to Taylor Swift's defense briefly before we move on to Jason, she is speaking to a young audience who's been raised on iPhones, and every advance in media appears to isolate people more and more and more. And the iPhone is almost the ultimate isolating tool. And so she is living a life and giving it voice that a lot of her fans are not living. And so they get their passionate experience through her. And I think that's got something to do with her popularity. Jason.
Yeah, I was raising my hand when Fred talk about before Fred negate his own statement, because I was thinking about Taylor Swift, and then turned out okay. But I'm less focused on the Taylor Swift as a passionate songwriter or performer. I'm more interested on the phenomena of Taylor Swift fan. Okay, I don't know how many of the teenager, especially teenager girls, are really passionate about her music, her performance. And if you really passionate, I think according to Nietzsche, you should spend money, attend the concert, enjoy the music, which I do. I find out it's pretty good. Okay, but I'm not sure how many of these fan are really fan, right? So according to Nietzsche, they are just because that's the right way to do, that's the everybody doing, so they are doing this way. So I think that's nothing to do with we should go to a Taylor Swift concert or not, more on whether or not you really love it. If you love it, you should do it. You should do it. If you don't like it, then you just don't have to do it, and then just ignore it. I think that's probably what Nietzsche is going to suggest. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, we should probably move on to the next aphorism, but I'm going to add one more thing. I think as an expression of real passion instead of passionateness, as a contrast to Taylor Swift, who honestly, I've never listened to her. I haven't got the slightest idea what she's doing. I just know that she's hugely popular. What I'm having a thought of here is I think what Nietzsche would approve of was Jimi Hendrix's performance at the Monterey Pop Festival, where he destroyed his guitar on the stage. And I think that was a spontaneous act of passion. He may have planned it ahead of time, but it certainly doesn't look like it. Anyway, all right. So 48. This, with the note on the bottom, helped me really get a grip on this one of knowledge of misery. And I think this is really interesting too, because this sort of follows in what we were just talking about. And the note that Kaufman provides is that this is a repudiation of Schopenhauer's pessimism. That Schopenhauer wasn't really experiencing pessimism. He was seeing a shadow of pessimism and describing and ascribing that to the meaning of the world in a lot of ways. And I thought, like, wow, that's absolutely amazing. I'm so glad to see that. So this is Nietzsche moving into his own space. Not that he hasn't repudiated Schopenhauer earlier, but this is almost explicitly repudiating Schopenhauer. And this this last sentence for recovering the notion of what misery actually is real misery. So again, this is an expression, I think, or a validation of passion as having value. Jason.
Yeah, I like this one, and then my interpretation is, of course, he talking about Schopenhauer, and then the pessimistic philosophy is not necessarily pessimistic. Let's put it this way, because the last sentence he talk about the recipe against this misery is misery, right? So, and then he also talking about the life. Seems like he talking about the life is miserable. Okay, so this kind of misery that you feel your existence, but it's not necessarily pessimistic. The reason I talk about this is related to the Buddhism thinking about the life is suffering, right? Dukkha. Okay, talk about. And when I talk this one to non-Buddhism or people have no Buddhism background, they always think about Buddhism is a pessimistic philosophy, pessimistic religion. But actually, it's not. It's the most optimistic philosophy. Okay, most optimistic religion, in my opinion. But that's the subtle things. It's very difficult to explain. And I think that this short, what considered to Buddhism sutra, it's very short. Okay, this short try to describe this situation. And at the beginning, Nietzsche also tried to describe the mind-body issue, soul-body issue, talk about misery of the soul, misery of the body. And I'm not very sure what he tried to express, but I do feel he tried to talk about the misery of mind is misery of body. Okay, my body is tightly related, or probably that's both are the same thing. But actually, that's he tried to express the misery philosophy is not necessary. If okay, pessimistic philosophy is not necessarily pessimistic. Misery of life is not necessary misery. I think that's he tried to say. Yeah.
All right. Thumbs up. Audrey.
Well, I have to agree with you now, Jason. That's been a while. But yeah, because I think that this kind of, I mean, there's suffering in the sense that, I mean, just listening to the news, and so I don't know what he's talking about. He's also talking about physical as well as soul in this one. It's how you can endure certain types of pain, how that affects you. So, and then you rely on fantasies. It's an interesting, it's similar to what Barbara was saying, like I want to keep, I'm healing right now and I don't want any negative thoughts because, whatever makes you feel comfortable doing to feel better, but you understand your pain. You understand it because you feel it and you live with it, and then you find a way to make it work somehow, but you allow the feelings to come up. And what's interesting here is you can also like think about the world in general and use your intellect, which maybe that's what he's saying about Schopenhauer. I mean, is it Schopenhauer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not by specific name, but yes.
Right. So but it's that pessimism is, of course we're all going to suffer. And, and Buddhism it could sound like that too. Life is suffering, birth, old age, sickness, and death. These things affect us. They are going to arouse your passions. You have a way to deal with it. Buddhism tells you to look at it, look and work with your mind. Other places, other areas will tell you to do something else. It's really interesting, but you don't intellectualize it. So, and that's what politics does. And so then now all of a sudden everybody's miserable because, we owe some, our debt is high. So, and now nobody believes anything good. You learned something. You learned a way to be miserable. So now you're miserable, or nobody listens to you. So because of the way things are set up in the world, constructed in the world. And so you can't go beyond that sometimes and work within because you're really confronted. And then you say, oh, woe is me. How can one person, help now? I am miserable that I can't do anything about this situation. So I'm just going to feel miserable. That's not the same kind of passion, I think. I don't believe that Nietzsche's talking about that passion. That's fear and everything else. That's like hiding things and just looking for a comfort zone.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what he's talking about. I think that he's observing what you just described, and that's why at the very end he begins by describing real misery, like when everybody was living in caves, and the potential death was around the corner for everybody every day, and pain was part of everyday life. And today, and I just love this, pain is now hated much more than was the case formerly. One speaks much worse of it, indeed. One considers the existence of the mere thought of pain scarcely endurable and turns it into a reproach against the whole of existence. Okay, I think there's a certain amount of satire going on there, but that's just a great piece of because pain is the reminder. The Sackler family managed to get pain listed as one of the vital signs in the 90s, and thus the opioid crisis, because now the doctors were supposed to ask, what level of pain, how much pain are you feeling?
Right.
10. And not very many people get to 10, but they may subjectively go, oh man, this is a 10. And okay, here's some heroin for you. It will ease your pain. Because even the littlest pain, we don't live with pain. We don't live with pain. And I think he, again, realizing what our origins are and who we are as organic beings is not against pain as a way of learning, like you just suggested earlier.
Right. It is a way of learning. That's the main thing, is that if you don't have pain, you're not going to fix your sickness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, okay, enough about me. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I really appreciated you bringing up the Stacklers getting painless as a symptom. I did not know that, and I think that's fascinating and really interesting commentary on intersection of culture and business and all sorts of things. I have a question for Audrey, but before that, I want to make a kind of general comment about pain. I think that people in psychological pains are actually in more pain than people in physical pain in many ways, because a lot of times people are in a war with themselves in their own head, like evaluating themselves, like holding up some kind of like moral standard for themselves or some kind of standards of performance which they can't possibly live up to. So they're in constant torment no matter where they are. Whereas if you're hungry, you're like, okay, I need to go find food. So where's the food? You go do something, you get some food, you're not hungry anymore. Or if you're suffering from some kind of physical ailment, I mean, depending on how bad it is, I mean, some physical ailments can be pretty bad, but at least you're not torturing yourself. And there was a really interesting study done by, or an observation made by a doctor in World War II, who I think it was like maybe in the Battle of Anzio or something, he ran out of morphine. And so when he went up to the soldiers, he would say, like, soldier, as you're lying there, like, how much pain do you feel? And he was really surprised at how little morphine the soldiers needed. And then when he got, but because he was a doctor in Chicago and he saw injuries, traumatic injuries like this all the time. And he's like, man, in Chicago, when people come into the operation room with a gunshot wound like this, they're screaming their head off and stuff. And what he surmised, and I don't think there's anything scientific to back this up, but I thought it was an interesting implication. And I've heard other people argue along these same lines, is that the soldiers are happy because they're wounded, they're getting off the battlefield, they're going to survive. So their pain is not being compounded by fear. Whereas, like, if you get shot and maybe you can't work or something, then your pain is compounded by fear. So there's a difference between emotional pain and physical pain, but in many ways, I think that emotional pain can be worse because it's a sense of attacking one's own identity, which is something you can't really escape from, and it's constant. And then I have a question for Audrey. So you made a really interesting remark when you were describing the modern situation where you said nobody believes in anything good, if I remember correctly. I was wondering if you would elaborate on
You're muted, Audrey.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Basically, it's because I have these, there's so many angry people, so many people filled with rage. And I live in a community where there's a lot of difference now. I mean, we're getting people from a different state coming in here and burning the ballot boxes and things like that. It's a problem. And I think that because people choose something to believe in and they hear it and then that's it, that's their world, and they don't really start to feel what's really going on or see what's really going on. And the way I respond to it is I actually respond to it viscerally, that level of rage, and I really think it has to do with people not being listened to. I mean, even the worst alt-right person to me is somebody that has some basic goodness and has basic human intelligence somewhere. And needs to be listened to. Let them vent out their horror. You know, so the way I would deal with it, of course, I don't know how to deal with other people's rage, and I'm not going to stand and argue with people. But I talk about the two-party system, you know, and I tell people if we had a parliamentary type system that we can adapt, the
okay.
more you can have a party that you can be listening to and that kind of stuff. So that's where it goes for me.
Okay.
I don't know if that
Well, that's okay. We're getting a little far afield here. I'd rather just kind of relate any of our comments to the aphorisms. I think we lost Alexander, but I don't think he was interested anyway. He thought he was going to get a classroom conversation. And I don't think that's what this is, but I think that's its virtue. Okay, Barbara.
Well, when I read this, I thought that he was sort of valorizing genuine, authentic bodily and physical pain because it was formative somehow. It made people stronger. It made people wiser. And it made me think, Philadelphia has a nice art museum, and they have a lot of medieval art, which contains lots of crucifixion images, and some are big, and all of them are real depictions of terrible suffering. I mean, now when you see a crucifix, it's a little thing on the wall, it's, with a guy, maybe there's no guy. But this, there people in those days really must have looked at this image and said, there's something in this for me. I understand how this informs my life, or maybe it is my life, or how I can reach up to be a better person by looking at this. So I just thought I'd pass that along because I was pretty surprised at some of the, I had sort of looked at medieval art as interesting, but it struck me the last time we were there how a medieval person might have related to, especially to those really graphic, bloody, scarred images of Christ.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. And I said earlier, I was relating this to, caveman days, but I think I'm not even sure where you'd start. We're probably the Renaissance. Pre-Renaissance people experienced the kind of pain that was there. There was a big literal physical pain. I'm not sure how troubled their souls were, but maybe even more so than anybody would be today, because you were supposed to believe in, the Christian God and all that. And if you didn't, you had a serious issue, if you even could not believe. But regarding those paintings, they're shocking even today, some of them. There's a triptych, and I wish now that I could remember who painted it. It was so awful. I couldn't believe it. Christ is practically skeletal on the cross. And it's just horrifying to imagine that that could be done to somebody by in a modern respect. I am unfamiliar with, I think, largely the kind of misery. And this is something else that I think what he's addressing here. And I'd like to know sort of, what do you think of this? The very last sentence, there is a recipe against pessimistic philosophers and the excessive sensitivity that seems to me to the real, quote, misery of our age, end quote. But this recipe may sound too cruel and might itself be counted among the signs that lead people to judge that, quote, existence is something evil, end quote. Well, the recipe against this misery is misery. And he's reintroducing this notion of evaluating things as good and evil. He's resurrecting it. Let's put it that way. He hasn't
Where are
really,
you reading from?
the very last two sentences, the very last paragraph of 48. Yeah, that was the part I read. So I think he's kind of getting a little dig in there again that, things that we might think of as evil may not necessarily be evil. And maybe we wouldn't have had the opioid crisis if people were more understood pain better, you know, or felt pain or knew pain instead of, and oh, there's another really cute thing. Where is it? It's about mosquito bites of the soul. Same spirit mentioned. Oh, well, okay, whatever. We can move on to something else. This is rich with irony, I think, a lot of it. And again, Kaufmann observed that Nietzsche was a stylist of the first order in German language. And I think that this aphorism exhibits a real facility with language. So it's one of the reasons I like it. Okay, 49, magnanimity and related matters. I thought this was interesting because I'm going to suppose that most of you are familiar with Barbara left. Well, maybe she has something else to do. This is an hour and a half today. Aristotle in the Ethics praises the great man and the great soul. And the great soul, magnanimity is one of the virtues. And that's in Aristotle's case, it's having lots of money, like Jeff Bezos say, but giving it all away in the way that sort of Bill Gates and Melinda Gates are doing with their money. And that kind of like the magnanimous person would fund the tragedies and the festivals and all of that stuff in Greece. They didn't have nearly as much money as Jeff Bezos has. But so when I ran across this, I really had to wrestle with what how he was using the word magnanimous. And I think he's not speaking of what Aristotle was speaking of. Generosity, kind of. Magnanimity is something a little bit more, because it's in the second paragraph here in the Kaufmann translation. The magnanimous person, or at least the type of magnanimity that has always been considered most impressive, appears to me as an extremely vengeful person who beholds satisfaction so close at hand and who drains it so fully and thoroughly to the last drop in anticipation that a tremendous and quick nausea follows this quick orgy. He rises above himself and forgives his enemy. And I was struck by this because I was so impressed. There was a father a few years ago, I can't remember, I can't give you the name, and his daughter had been killed, raped and killed, and she was like 12 or 14 or something. And they caught the guy, and when they were going to take him to court, the father didn't exactly forgive him, but did not plead for the death penalty. He didn't want the death penalty for this guy. And I think that's the kind of magnanimity that Nietzsche is describing here. And so I had to kind of wrestle with that a little bit. And I find myself maybe agreeing with what he's saying here. The last sentence, magnanimity contains the same degree of egoism as does revenge, but egoism of a different quality. It's hard to decide what that really means, right? For me, anyway, I'm not sure. I don't think it's been elaborated enough. But I think that reveals something about that father who should have wished that the guy had been drawn and quartered, and maybe did imagine all of that and caught himself up and was revolted by the notion that he could have ever imagined something like that. And so he jumped to the opposite extreme. Audrey.
I think that this is a really great aphorism, and I think that it sort of relates to 48. And I think he uses he feels the magnanimous person could be, could be the same, have the same level of renunciation as, is it renunciation? That revenge could also be as strong as being magnanimous. And I don't quite understand, because revenge comes from some kind of passion. That's the way I see the word. I mean, that's what the word means to me, that it's passionate. And yet a lot of generosity and stuff isn't passionate. I mean, some of it is, no question. But it's a thought out plan. It's not in the moment, this is how I'm going to address this. I don't think he's saying that that's a terrible thing, because you're rising above yourself and then you're coming up with a thought of how you're going to rise above. But the whole point is working with the feeling and then coming forward with the thought that I can move on to this. Killing is killing is killing. I'm not going to let the state kill somebody in a measured way where my daughter, it's a whole different thing. One thing isn't related to the other. So it's interesting. And it's also a confusing concept, to me. I mean, it's just because, we're raised to think that if you do something really horrible, you should be punished. And that level of punishment has already been talked about what it is. And so therefore, you want that, you want to let out your pain somehow by taking something from somebody else. And it's a really vicious way of looking at the world. And I actually think that that's a big problem. And I wonder what he saw in terms of, did he really think that it was okay to kill people? Like how would he respond?
Well, that's part of what I think this whole adventure is for me, to clarify just questions like that pop
Yeah.
up here. Because of the
Right.
style, the way he approached philosophy is like unlike anything that came before him. And so you've got sometimes it feels like you're grasping at straws. And I hesitate to get too judgmental without having more at my disposal, in a way we're at the very beginning of his career. Not quite, but this is considered his first mature work. So there were 2 volumes of aphorisms that preceded this that we largely ignored. But now I feel like this is where we could really start to get a grip on what did Nietzsche really think about all of this stuff, even though we all have some different opinions along the way. So he's sort of, in the end, he's kind of talking about egoism. He's doing a little comparison again with I forget I should have gone back and looked. There's one prior to avarice and love. Avarice and love. I don't know if you remember that aphorism. They're the same thing. They just are expressing different ways of looking at it. And in a way, I think, in terms of egoism, I think that's what he's trying to say here as well. I think there may be, outside of that kind of definition, because that's all he's dealing with here, right? He's not casting a moral window on the whole thing or any of that. He's just talking about what's an egotistic act. And this kind of magnanimity is virtually the same as revenge, but it's of a different quality, whatever that means. Jason.
Yeah, I think he talked about the title as magnanimity. I think he's talking about Aristotle. And then when Aristotle talk about magnanimity, Aristotle is talking about the personal character, because he is a virtual ethic philosopher. So I think Nietzsche want to change this, but by keeping the same concept of magnanimity. Okay, so that's why if I had to draw the conclusion, he will say magnanimity is kind of egoistic, okay, or egoism. And forgiving is the best way to revenge, or put this way, forgiving is vengeful. So think about the real situation, but we cannot take, we don't take this one as a magnanimity as bad, right? Because according to Nietzsche, egoism is good, or sometimes good, and revenge is not bad at all. So think about the situation as the father, your example of the father forgiving or not pursue death penalty for his daughter's killer. Well, death penalty may not be the best revenge, right? So, you know, if you leave the predator alive, could be more revenge. And sometimes I think in our daily life, sometimes, well, let's talk about education, right? When kids make mistake, you can choose to punish the kids or just forgive the kids. And sometimes forgiving is the best lesson. Okay, so that's the magnificence. So sometimes if you take as a criminal, forgiving could be the best punishment. Sometimes I do feel, and personally, I learned a lesson. I'm not going to reveal what kind of crime I did, but somebody forgive me. And they give me a strong lesson. I will never make this mistake again. I remember the person said, oh, that's fine. Okay, don't worry. Okay, he didn't say anything. Then after that, I become very, very careful. Okay, so I think that's very important. So that's why if I have to draw one line, I say he is in agreement with Aristotle's magnanimity, but magnanimity is not a personal character. It's a behavior. It's a method. It's a means. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I should probably go back and read Ethics again. Because I may have jumped to a conclusion there. Nick, I think you're going to get the last word here.
Yeah, thanks. We just want to make an observation. You know, in addition to the contrast, but there is also the temporality aspect, how fast those opposite emotions erupt. So in the very first paragraph, there are 5 appearances of sudden. Yeah, 5 appearances. The sudden chill, a sudden renunciation, experience sudden satiety, sudden nausea, sudden chill. And then towards the end of it, the second paragraph, two references to a moment, that a moment ago, a moment earlier. So this is very interesting to me because this really ties to his idea of eternal recurrence.
We're
Things
not
happen at the moment. Things
Nick,
happen at the moment.
Nick, we're not at the eternal recurrence yet. So don't even bring it up. That's in Zarathustra. It's not here. Well, okay then. We have to stick to the rules of the game. All right. Okay. So that's going to wrap for this week. I realized that 56 is the end of book 1, as I was stumbling a little further ahead of the game here. And so I'm going to assign 50 to 56. I'm sure we won't get that far, but read to the end of book 1, and then it's going to be another hour-and-a-half session. We'll see. We may actually have, but I already explained that I'd like to do a recap of where we are at the end of book 1 to kind of, and I don't know if you guys want to kind of look it over again and sort of recall a few aphorisms or something to get some sort of idea of what is he doing here? What is he up to? And I think that might be interesting, even if it's, you know, we talk for 10 or 15 minutes about that. I think that might be fun. All right. So I'm going to post next week's right as soon as in 5 minutes. I'll have that done. I've got this figured out now. So, all right, Nick, I didn't mean to be mean, but I did want to stop you because of the reference to the eternal recurrence that just is at this stage of the game, in keeping with the conceit of the meetup. We don't know about that yet.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not offended. The point
Okay.
I'm trying to get across is that these two paragraphs are framed in a temporal context of sudden and moment.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up. I really am glad you brought that up. Because I think that plays a large part in really understanding what he's talking about in terms of magnanimity, which is almost something we assign to somebody else in a way as we observe this behavior. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, that you're still here. And Mark, maybe you're going to get the last word.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I have a question about the discussion protocol. So, my quick search on the eternal return, the Wikipedia article, says that it's actually first introduced. Can you
We're
hear me?
not, don't even
I
bring
know,
it up.
no. This is not about the eternal return. I'm just saying the Wikipedia article says it's first presented in this book, The Gay Science, but apparently in a later aphorism. So my question is about, go ahead.
Yeah.
So my question is about, so you want us just to discuss, even in this book, just up to the point that we're at, not stuff that comes in. Right. Okay. That's just what I wanted to clarify. That's it.
That's
Thank
the
you.
whole.
Let me
We-
speak something for this. You know, I realize it's very important to stick with Lindsay's rule, because I've been around a lot of meetup. I know when we talk about Nietzsche, how wild people can go, especially for Nietzsche. They will say Bertrand Russell say this. They will say like this guy said that Trump will do this. Then we go all over the place, and then become so heated discussion for 2 sections. Then all people are gone because you all exhausted all the idea, so nothing else to talk about. That's why we can sustain for such a long time and always keep this one. So if you dislike it, just stick with that. I think that's very important, especially for Nietzsche, because you can reference anybody in this world. So I stop here.
No, I appreciate it. I just wanted to be clear that that was the protocol. It wasn't just, it was like where we're at in this book. And
Okay.
since he did that earlier, I brought up Epicurus a while ago, and he said, "Oh, hold on, that's only like 2 you know, we're going to be there really soon." So I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
The idea for me is to know what you think, as if you're reading this for the first time, just like the people did in 1872. They had to figure it out for themselves, and we can do the same thing. And honestly, I don't think all the scholarship in the world will enlighten us any more than our own conversation will about what he's up to. So there. All right, that's it. I gotta go, people. Bye.
Goodbye.